Hello and welcome to a special edition of World Insight with me, Tian Wei, from Boao, the site of the annual Boao Forum for Asia. With dramatic changes going on in the world, how to maximize certainties while preparing for uncertain ones. That is what many are frequently thinking about these days. No wonder that has become a priority for discussion and brainstorming at this year's Boao Forum. Today, we are bringing to you this distinguished panel jointly presented to you by CGTN and the Boao Forum for Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, what a pleasure to see you once again in Boao Forum for Asia. They say uncertainties are just a matter of life. Well, according to philosophers, yes. But none of us like uncertainties when it comes to economic growth. We want to have certainty, we want to have a predictable and a better future. But how to achieve that? Now, I do have a very strong panel with 7 people in the know to help us to shape our thoughts and to seek solutions with this session.
Hans-Paul Berkner, the chairman of the Boston Consulting Group. Kent E. Calder, the director of the Center for East Asian Studies at Johns Hopkins University. Michele Geraci, the undersecretary of the Italian Ministry of Economic Development. Hitoshi Suzuki, a member of the Policy Board of the Bank of Japan. Wong Kan-sung, the former Deputy Prime Minister of Singapore. Zhang Tao, the Deputy Managing Director of the IMF, and Zhang Yuyan, the Director of the Institute of World Economics and Politics at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences.
Let me do a survey right now. Since we talk about certainty and uncertainty, let's have a vote among the 7 gentlemen here. Who believe right now, more certainty than uncertainty? 3, more certainties than uncertainty. 4, okay? More certainties than uncertainty. Let's remember their stance, huh? Let's see whether at the end of discussion they're still going to raise their hand when that is being announced. Now, more uncertainties than certainties. 3. Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, remember how they voted? Okay. So now, let's go. Certainties. Really?
I think we should be clearly saying that, you know, even the immediate present is full of uncertainties and full of certainties. And I'm not quite sure whether, you know, this is different from what it was a year ago or 10 years ago. But I think, first of all, we should remember that we had very, very strong development over the last 10 years, even after the financial crisis. And certainly here in China over the last 30, 40 years, an outstanding development. And we have to see that the future requires more efforts, more restructuring, more reform, more changes. It has always been that way. And I think the key is to see that the future is in our hands and we need to make it work. The future does not just happen, we make the future happen. And as long as we are also, I would say, realistic in expecting more modest growth rates, and not feel surprised every time, you know, the IMF reduces its forecasts, you know, throughout the year. You know, as long as we are really realistic, I think, you know, the future is positive, and I think we'll make it work.
You point your arrow to the IMF. Therefore, I have to let Mr. Zhang to counter-argue what you have just said, since Mr. Zhang voted more uncertainty than certainty.
But let me just say one thing. You know, I'm just mentioning the IMF because there are many forecasts, and all the forecasts usually start strong with a year, and then they're being reduced. So don't take it personally.
I'm sure Mr. Zhang doesn't take it personally, but go ahead, Mr. Zhang. Uncertainty, really?
I voted more uncertainty rather than certainty. I have my reasons. I know numbers or numberings. I have, in my views, I have at least two uncertainties. One is, I think everybody know, we are facing the trade policy tensions, which raised a huge amount of uncertainties. The second, we may face the financial tightening up in a more than abrupted way. If the dovish view of the central bank reversed, and that also has a consequences. And we have estimated that that would cost the world probably 0.75% of GDP as a whole in the foreseeable futures because of that. So that's why I call it the two uncertainties. On the side of the certainties, I would have one certainties. I know we have to do right things. That's for sure. To counter these uncertainties. What I mean by do the right thing is, of course, first of all, of course, you don't shoot your own wood. Meaning, first you have to make your macroeconomic policies in the right place to support the inclusive and sustainable growth. And second, of course, you have to continue for those structural policies, structural reforms, to fight the declining trend of the productivities, to fight what we call the new rising, the forces of the firm dynamism, which means there's more barriers to the firms, for firms to get entrance of the market, and also for the firms to exist.
Thank you, Mr. Zhang, for sharing your numbers and giving the advice, which I understand, I think at last, which is not to shoot your own feet, right? Do the right thing with the matches with the slogans. But Mr. Wang,
yes.
I want you to come in as well about that. Can we really avoid shooting our own feet? We've been doing that in history.
I think from time to time we can't help but shoot ourselves on our own feet. But I think wisdom will prevail if leaders take a long-term view instead of a short-term one. And I share many of the points that Mr. Chang just mentioned about the uncertainties. I think one of it actually grew from polarized domestic politics. People have become divided, and they have the extreme left, the extreme right dominating the discourse. Moderate voices hardly heard, or they don't prevail because the media always highlight the bad news rather than the good one.
Don't blame everything on the media, please.
Well, somebody has to be the newsmaker, and the media is not the only newsmaker, but they sometimes do make some news. I'm not blaming the news media as such, but I'm saying that people who read this will get a sense that indeed the extreme left and the extreme right are dominating the discourse. And therefore, political leaders who give vent to that get elected, and when they get elected, sometimes they do things that they promise, like in the case of the US or some of the other countries, and as a result, you see today the trade war, tariff war between China and the US. And this is a big issue for us today because it affects business confidence, it affects people's confidence, it affects consumer confidence. And as a result of which, many things are held back. And there's a collateral effect to that as well, because countries that do business with the US or with China, like Singapore, China is our largest trading partner. If indeed it comes to pass that there's going to be a serious trade tariff problem, then Singapore's economy will be affected. And not just Singapore alone. All those countries that manufacture in China, and as part of the big supply chain, they will also be affected. So I'm really very concerned. And it's not just in Asia alone. And you look at Europe, for example, I think Brexit is causing a lot of nightmares to the Europeans, not just to the British themselves. And it will have a knock-on effect on the rest of the world as well. So I think these are the two key ones.
Mr. Wang has pushed several buttons. What about the U.S., China-U.S. trade war? And what about Europe? You're not doing well. You have a good Brexit. You're supposed to be responsible for that. So let's have those buttons, in a way, reflected in our conversation. Mr. Calder, you are the only one coming from Washington. So therefore...
I started thinking about all the uncertainties, and there's no question. We've got Brexit, we've got the trade war, we've got the danger of a simultaneous decline in the major economies. You asked about the trade crisis. I guess as far as that concerned, I am very hopeful and I have very low expectations, I guess is the way that I would summarize it. I think a combination of the delicacy of financial markets and the approaching U.S. political cycle will force both countries to an accommodation before long. But of course, the longer-term issues are substantial, and I think some of those will remain, but we'll get an agreement relatively soon, just because both sides feel that the stakes are too high to avoid it.
So a temporary agreement to pave the way for further discussions. That's what you're saying.
I think so.
Mr. Zhang, I have to go to you now. Since Professor Calder have clearly mentioned his academic views, at least, about the ongoing issue between China and U.S., and everybody seems earlier talk about the uncertainties, regard that as one of those. So, Mr. Zhang, 从中国的角度, from China's perspective, would you like to say something?
我刚才呢也是举手呢，认为是不确定性多于这个确定性。
I actually voted more uncertainties than certainties. Uncertainties that were discussed by previous speakers had much to do with the China-U.S. trade dispute. Really, it is a big issue. It matters with investors' confidence. Now, if we look at the negotiations between the two sides, there are many improvements. I feel optimistic about the prospect of reaching a deal between the two sides which is constructive and positive to not only the two countries, but the rest of the world. From what we have heard from media, the items on their negotiation agenda are also in line with the interest of both countries. Of course, we've heard noises about compromises due to some pressure. I believe what China is actually doing is in line with its own plan. For instance, the foreign investment law adopted by China recently. We basically combined three previous regulations. The law is now the updated version for FDI, for the further opening up and protection of properties, and all the other things. More than the China-U.S. trade dispute, I'm actually more concerned about the monetary policy of the Fed. The Fed will decide if it will no longer raise interest rates and reduce its balance sheet. But the overall monetary policy of the Fed is on the track with a neutral interest rate. Does that mean the Fed monetary policy is reversed to neutral interest rate, or will it be followed by a more loose monetary policy? This can have a big impact on price access and on the debts held by emerging economies. That is my biggest concern.
我觉得这个是我最关注的今年的全球经济增长的这个不确定性。
The fundamentals. Professor Calder, you want to respond briefly, or?
Yes, I do tend to agree with that. I think that as we move into the election season in the United States, of course, politics, keeping the economy moving is a consideration. Also, the broader implications, including globally, of the interest rate rises are not lost. And President Trump himself, of course, has been jawboning the Fed a little bit as well. So I would tend to agree with that. I think interest rate neutral probably throughout this year, unless there are some major surprises that would change the situation.
Mr. Zhang, briefly respond.
In terms of the monetary policies in the U.S., it's pretty much follow the data dependent. I think so far Federal Reserve did the things quite well. And we hope that communication, that effective communications continues to be data dependent and make sure the market understand where the monetary policy to go. But having said that, the financial market conditions, these are pretty much the uncertainties hanging around. I agree.
Chinese President Xi Jinping just made a trip to Italy, and the memorandum signed is the headlines of the news. So 2.5 billion for this time, 29 agreements. What is behind it?
The reason why we signed this memorandum of understanding, and Italy became the first G7 country to join the Belt and Road Initiative, is because we want to catch up with the time lost in the past. We noticed that while Europe on the face tends to have a unified policy towards China, and indeed insist on having a unified approach to China, every single country does what they like, as they should. And so we realized over the last 10, 15 years, our relationship with China, commercial relationship with China, has lagged behind those of our partners, the other European countries. We keep on saying we do good business with China. In reality, we don't. We only do 13 billion of exports. France does 19, the UK 19, Switzerland 22, Germany 87. So we're looking at multiples of what Italy does. Italy needs a little bit more of a government-to-government approach because of the fragmented structure of its economy, small, medium, and very micro enterprises. A lot of companies in Italy are below 15 people, family businesses for legal and cultural purposes. And so we thought that signing this would boost the relationship with China and accelerate it. In reality, all European countries want to be part of the Belt and Road. We see the opportunity. And so Italy, this is the big news for you guys in the media, for the first time is a leader again. Leading, to be a leader means to lead. And when we were criticized, me personally also, for taking care of all this over the last few months, it's because we are a leading country, we're a founding member of the European Community in '57, and we therefore want to lead. And leading means to do things first. And I give you another forecast, I give you certainty. I raised my hand when I said, I believe in certainties.
Yeah.
I give another certainty.
Okay.
All the other countries will follow Italy and sign MOU. And I can give you 2 names.
Really?
But I won't.
I love the Italian humor and the Italian confidence there.
Thank you.
Okay, sir. Now let me go to Japan. Of course, we have a central banker here sitting with us, Mr. Suzuki. Japan, not only a big regional player, but also economically speaking, certainly a global player. But you have your own set of challenges, just as every gentleman sitting here, the country behind them. For example, aging population and many other social issues. China also is touching on that too, by the way. So how are you seeing the certainties and uncertainties? Please, sir.
So at this moment, Japan's unemployment rate is at 2.3 or 2.5%, which is a great number. But at the same time, in Japan, the population will be decreasing by 500,000 a year in the future. So in Japan, right now, it is quite crucial how to utilize AI or robotics process automation. And, but in Japan, if we utilize those methods too much, then labor market will be loosening, so that we should, pay a proper attention to that to balance those usage of AI or RPA. But if we utilize properly, then we can raise our potential growth rate or natural rate of interest rate.
What is the right degree? How can you do that?
It is quite difficult. It's sort of art.
It's kind of art. Are you
so.
master some degrees of that art already?
No.
Technologies, will that really change us and transform us to our solution, with our solutions to solve many of the problems, gentlemen, you just raised?
There's an effort to really create anxieties around all new things. And the anxiety is that we will become all obsolete. You know, whether it's, you know, consultants or journalists or, business people or drivers, everybody becomes obsolete. Now, technology will not, you know, come from one day to another, but it will come over the next years and decades, and it will make life easier. But we also need to adjust, and we will need to use the time to adjust. Whether it's, finding new jobs for some people who lose jobs, but also change the content of many jobs. And I think it's important that we really learn how to make those changes happen, that we also change ourselves and be open to the change, and not to create this anxiety that people will become obsolete and then we'll have to silence them by an unconditional basic income. I think the key is to really tackle the issues and talk really about lifelong learning. What does it mean?
The question is how to do it, isn't it, Mr. Wang?
That requires leadership of the leaders to be able to have a frank conversation with the people and tell them what is happening and prepare them for that. And of course, it's not easy to make people change the way they work. You basically have to have the right policies around, the right incentives, and when they see the results and they see the benefits, then people will start to change.
But Professor Calder, very briefly from you.
We really need to think about retraining people.
China has a big job. Mr. Zhang, I have to go to you on that. 30 million jobs China wants to create for this year alone. How can you achieve that with all of these technologies that can really replace human beings?
I think the number 13 million is indeed a big number for many countries, but for China, any number divided by 1.4 billion people becomes a small number. At the same time, any small amount multiplied by 1.4 billion becomes a big number.
I like that math.
In the past, we have achieved even higher number of jobs created. This year is already a decrease compared to previous years. In the long term, China's labor supply is decreasing. Over the past 10 years, our labor supply decreased by more than 20 million. So in my opinion, it is an inevitable path for China to develop technology and rely on technology. Moreover, if we look at the course of human development in history, as technology gets more advanced, the job market has not contracted. To the contrary, demand for labor has increased along with technological development. So the two don't have to be in conflict with one another. China has arrived at a critical stage of development. That is, labor cost is rising at a very fast speed. This is exactly the right time for us to try to use machines to supplement the labor supply. Only by doing this will we be able to support economic development in the long term.
Even though you still haven't told me how that 30 million jobs will be created. But I think I'll let you pass because you really shine some light on this topic. Mr. Garaji, of course, Europe faces a very different picture that we are talking about here.
Yes, we cannot create 30 million jobs in Europe. That's another certainty. I raise my hand and I'm proving it.
Exactly,
I love
it.
There are uncertainty. But we, of course, our target growth in Europe is in the range of 1.5%. This is would be a good scenario. And the big difference with China, needless to say, is that China can grow almost without doing anything, just from the supply of rural to urban migrants. Used to be 18 million, 15, 16 million, and that's about 1.something% of the population. And with an income ratio of 3 times, urban income divided by rural income, moving 1.5% of population from making $1 to $3, that's already almost, with all the indirect effect, 1.5 to 2% of GDP growth. So if nothing happened in China, that 2% GDP growth would just naturally come from people moving homes. Then you have the investment, which fills the gap. Then you have a little bit of increasing consumption of the urban population that is already existing there, and you arrive I make it simple, 2 plus 2 plus 2, 6%, almost sustainable growth. We say demography and geography. These are the two certainties. One can be adapted a little bit to demography with the policy on birth and not. Geography is what it is. And those two certainty will further reduce all the uncertainty and Brexit. And having a border between Northern Ireland and Ireland and not being able to move it, this is the core problem with Brexit, which I do forecast may not happen because of the geography really dominating these. And on the other hand, we also know that we cannot exceed 1.5, even 2% growth because the demography in Europe and in Italy, we have a fertility rate very, very low. We have a big problem of demography, and at this rate of 1.1 birth rate in China, even with the relaxing of policy, China will experience a serious demographic problem in 2045, 2050, just like we have now.
I think one of the key elements, going back to what you said about demography, in Europe, we will run out of people before we run out of jobs, and the same is true in Japan. I think we need the technology to really make sure that the aging population is still productive.
Mr. Suzuki, your comments now?
Some analysis says that in Japan, in the next 10 years, that probably 2 million routine jobs will be replaced by technology, but newly 1.2 million or 1.3 million non-routine workers needed. But there will be a big mismatch in people. So routine worker cannot do non-routine business. So that only education can solve those problems. So that we have to pay attention to educational changes.
We touch on a lot of areas. The reason why we touch on them is because we do have smarter audience sitting there. They want to go more in-depth probably about some of the points you just mentioned, the gentleman. So let's open our floor right now. The gentleman over there.
My name is Shen Wang. I'm a lawyer. So my question is a twofold question. If you believe the certainties are larger than uncertainties, so what kind of measures would you like to take in the event of black swan event? And if you believe uncertainties is larger than the certainties, what measures you would like to take to manage uncertainties? Thank you.
You are a philosopher by nature. Thank you. Okay, next question. This lady, please.
I'm with the 21st Century Business Herald, and my question goes to Mr. Garaci. So in addition to boosting bilateral trade, what else opportunities have you seen in the Belt and Road Initiative? And how will Italian government integrate its own development strategy with the Belt and Road Initiatives?
Mr. Garaci, did you realize you just become the spokesperson of the whole Italian government here in Boao Forum? Okay, thank you. More questions? The lady over there in green, please.
I'm with Global Times. I have a question to the gentlemen who believe uncertainties. Since we are actually in front of so many uncertainties of the world economy, what can Asia and all those emerging countries in Asia region do, or what kind of action they should take?
And any other questions? Okay, the gentleman over there. Yes, please, next.
Hello, Jan Klaviter, I'm with Anglo American, and I'm very surprised that climate change hasn't been mentioned at all in this. Is that in the certain camp or in the uncertain camp?
What do you think?
Well, I'm not on the panel.
Okay, thank you, sir. I think those are the questions we could collect for now. I'm sure you have a lot of different issues that you have in mind. So let's clear up the Italy related issue first.
Although I say we want to be leader for the first time, really Italy has been at the center of the Silk Road for centuries, and I don't want to talk about Marco Polo in the 1200 during the Yuan dynasty, but also during the Jesuit time, 1600, that's when really the Silk Road really caught up, and Italian has always been trading with China. And I'll tell you another thing, in 1970, in the middle of global uncertainty, then, yes, Italy was one of the first countries to entertain diplomatic relationship with China.
Okay.
And after that, every country in the world, of course, joined and recognized China.
Okay.
One thing I want to stress, and then I stop, is like this is really a project to strengthen friendship between two peaceful countries.
It's only fair that I let Mr. Zhang to also comment about this a little bit. Go ahead, sir.
I think President Xi Jinping's visit to Italy and the signing of the China-Italy Belt and Road Initiative Cooperation Agreement is very important. The Belt and Road Initiative is a very inclusive one. It has made a lot of achievements in the past 5 years. At the same time, we need to continue to push forward. But we're looking at a lot of certainty and uncertainty. I think there's close relations with the cooperation between China and Italy and other developed countries. The signing of the agreement means that both parties have a direction. There will be supporting laws and regulations in the future, which will pave the way for progress.
One of the things is very certain, 确定性, that is, we are all on a learning curve. We need to come up with new ideas and do it gradually, implement them beautifully, so that this learning curve will be well earned. That's not just about Belt and Road, it's also about many other issues that all of you have just touched on. Mr. Zhang, now is Mr. Zhang, Tao Zhang from IMF.
I would like to address these questions on what to do and what about the climate change, particularly for Asia and emerging markets. Two concrete suggestions. One is to fight with uncertainties. Asia, particularly this part of Asia, we need to try everything to support innovation. Because innovation is there already. Innovation can provide a variety of the new technologies which provide the opportunities for higher efficiencies, productivities. Second, for Asia, you have to continue the effort to make greater integrations among the Asian economies. This is a better way. This has already proved a better way. We already estimate that if we get rid of this tariff and non-tariff barriers between Asian countries, in the next 10 years or so, the Asian economy will gain by anywhere between 10 to 15% of the Asian GDPs, which basically means the size of the GDP of India plus Korea combined. So it's a huge benefit. So
thank you, sir. Briefly from you.
Yeah, the key to really ensure dealing with uncertainties and also black swans is cooperation. And we have seen in the 2008-2009 financial recession that it only stayed a recession and not became the Great Depression because companies and countries around the world were working together, and China played a very important role with its enormous investment program, as did the Europeans, North America, and the rest of the world. And I think also when it comes to climate change, I think the solution is not that we can foresee them, but the solution is working together and solving them together.
Right.
And I think that will be the key. So cooperation will be the key solution for all these uncertainties that we have to deal with.
Okay, Mr. Wang, very briefly.
I started by being on the certainty group, but I have an uncertain point, and that is the climate change, actually, which I want to touch on earlier. And we know that climate change will come upon us, and Singapore is an island economy, small state. We have seen sea level rising, temperature getting warmer, and we have to be prepared for that. And in order to do that, I think countries need to work together on this. And you need multilateral efforts. You need multilateral systems in order to anchor all that.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Zhang, very briefly.
Let me talk about how to deal with uncertainty. There's an old saying in China that is to stay put to cope with every change. There are several levels. The most important thing is international cooperation. We have been doing it all the time. Today's challenges come from the lack of international cooperation between countries. Besides, for the enterprise, it is still good to make its own innovation, and it's still necessary for the individual to learn. In developing Asian countries, there are actually things that can be continuously worked on. For example, RCEP negotiations, the establishment of regional trade organizations. This is very important.
Professor Calder, please. And then we go to Mr. Suzuki.
Yes, thank you. I agree very much on this theme of global cooperation. Certainly, the one thing I would go back to is one of those certainties that we discussed near the beginning, namely health care. This is an area, it's a win-win situation, working together to improve global health care for all the world.
Okay. Mr. Suzuki.
Also, I think that global communication is quite important. And in Japan, that from the second quarter of last year, that gradually exports start to decreasing. And it is quite important to increase trade. But right now, that uncertainty is located in trade friction. But within the government and the corporate sector, that if we have more global communication, probably we can, to some extent, solve those problems.
Cooperation, communication, we got a lot of key words from these very smart gentlemen on the stage. Before we go, I wonder whether there's another certainty that we could also embrace, that is history. We all have shared history of human being. There are lessons and experiences that we can all learn, even at this stage of our development. If we grasp that, that will be a huge resource for all of us to handle the uncertainties right now. Without elaborating the 1,000 years of history, let me go to you for final words. Everyone, one sentence. We wrap it up. Now, let's go the other way around, okay? So, Mr. Zhang Yuyan, you go first.
In dealing with certainty and uncertainty, let this be the guide. To fix problems in reality, look for answers in history.
Thank you. Mr. Zhang, no pressure.
I said it already. Let's do right things. Do no harms. Don't inflict a self-wounded wound.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Wong.
I think it's incumbent on all leaders in the world, whether it's business leaders or political leaders, to bear in mind that they are just the custodian and the stewards of today's present, and they have to care for the future generation.
Leadership. Thank you.
So I think that we need global communication and the proper usage of technologies.
Thank you, Mr. Suzuki. Mr. Garlacci.
I would say do not forget ethics and morality and everything else that is the tissue of all societies. We've been talking about money, climate, but interpersonal relationship in a good way would keep us going even if GDP was less than 6.7.
Thank you. And Professor Calder.
A phrase, not a sentence, improving global health.
All right, there we go.
I would
Last
say
but not least.
The future is bright, but we need to make it happen, and we need to work together to make it happen, because we are all in one boat, which is called the Earth.
So, I promise you we'll have a vote at the end of our discussion. Let's do a vote now. With the advice you give and you listen to, can we have more certainties for our future? Can we have a vote now?
If the advice is taken.
Yes. Well, okay. There we go. And I should ask the audience if you think more certainty or uncertainty to come. Certainty with all the advice, please raise your hand. I would raise my hand. All right, we still have some skeptical minds in the audience, but we're going to convince you with our actions. Thank you so much. For now, let's put our hands together to thank all our panelists. Thank you.